My daughter always loved telling the truth. When I asked her if she thought I was pretty, she looked right at me and said, "Honestly, Mom, you're the ugliest mom at my whole preschool." When my mother-in-law pointed her finger in my face and called me a wasteful spender for buying her an expensive backpack, I asked my daughter how that made her feel. She smiled and said, "Honestly, I was pretty happy watching you get yelled at." My husband once joked with her, asking if she would take care of me when I got old.
She scoffed.
"I am not taking care of her. When she gets old, she should just hurry up and be put 6 feet under." My heart went completely cold, but her eyes curved into happy little crescents. "I am just telling the truth." Later on, a detective came to our house doing a routine neighborhood canvass and asked my daughter a few standard questions. Once again, my daughter told the truth. But this time, it was a truth she would regret for the rest of her life. The detective knocked on our door to update the local residential registry. My 7-year-old daughter, Brenda, blinked her big eyes and asked, "Why do you have to write our names down?" The detective gently patted her head. "It helps keep the neighborhood safe, and it helps us make sure bad people do not kidnap little kids." Brenda nodded, her face suddenly lighting up with an exaggerated look of realization. "Oh, I get it. You want to catch kidnappers. Well, isn't my mom one of those? She told me out of her own mouth yesterday that she kidnapped me." The smile froze completely on the detective's face. I stared at my daughter in absolute shock. Seeing the sly, calculating gleam in her eyes, my brain started to buzz. Brenda had a habit of saying honest things specifically designed to humiliate me and cause me pain. Just yesterday, I refused to let her eat too much junk food before dinner. She threw a fit, calling me an evil mother and screaming that she didn't want to be my daughter anymore. I was exhausted and furious, so I snapped back, "You're right. You aren't my daughter. I kidnapped you." At the time, she argued back saying she didn't believe me. I never imagined she would take a sarcastic comment she didn't even believe, package it as the truth, and feed it directly to a police officer. The detective was already looking at me with a completely different expression. I forced out a dry, awkward laugh. She was misbehaving yesterday, and I lost my temper. It was just a stupid joke. I didn't think she would take it literally. The detective's brow relaxed slightly. He turned to Brenda. "Little girl, you can't joke about things like that. If your mom gets mistaken for a kidnapper, she could go to jail." Seeing Brenda nod, the knot in my chest finally loosened. I thought the ordeal was over. But a second later, Brenda looked up with an expression of pure, innocent sincerity. "But my mom can't have babies. If I wasn't kidnapped, where did I come from?" The scrutiny and suspicion instantly returned to the detective's eyes. I panicked and quickly tried to explain. "I had an IUD put in right after she was born." When kids hear about birth control, they misunderstand what "can't have babies" means. I tugged on Brenda's sleeve, silently begging her to stop talking. She refused to listen. "Mom couldn't have babies right after she got married. But I am already 7 years old." I had no idea how a 7-year-old girl possessed the mental capacity to connect those dots. But when you thought about what she was implying, it was impossible not to jump to horrible conclusions. My husband and I had been married for 6 years. I had an IUD for those exact 6 years. So how could we possibly have a 7-year-old daughter? The detective clearly did the math in his head. His expression turned dead serious. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see the child's birth certificate." My stomach dropped to the floor. There was no birth certificate for Brenda in this house. 6 years ago, I had literally fought off human traffickers to rip this child out of their hands. When the police eventually pulled the files on her biological parents, the reality left everyone speechless. My husband and I had looked at each other with pale faces, sharing the exact same thought. If we sent this poor baby back to her biological family, living with them would be a fate worse than death. We simply couldn't bear it. So, we went through the system, adopted her, and raised her to this day. Brenda probably thought my angry comment yesterday was just a cruel joke, but she had no idea that the joke was actually the truth. The only reason we never told her was that we didn't want her to feel like an outsider in her own home. But now, if I didn't confess, this detective might actually put me in handcuffs. Just as I opened my mouth to explain the adoption, Brenda suddenly shrieked in mock excitement.
"Oh,
I remember now. Mom got pregnant out of wedlock. She had me before she got married. When the grown-ups talk about women being loose, this is what they mean, right?" I stood frozen in place. If things were really the way she was describing them, I would have wanted the floor to open up and swallow me out of shame. But my silence in that moment wasn't born of embarrassment. It was born of a chilling, profound heartbreak. Thinking she had successfully pierced my armor, The corners of Brenda's mouth curled up into a thrilled little smirk. Mom, I am just telling the truth to help clear your name. You shouldn't be mad at me. The detective withdrew his intense gaze from me, shaking his head slightly as he finished writing down our information. In a corner where no one could see, my hands were curled into fists, my fingernails biting into my palms as I desperately pushed down the surge of bitter emotion. This was not the first time she had done something like this. Back when she was in preschool, she constantly praised other mothers in front of me, talking about how gorgeous they were. I asked her, "Do you think Mom isn't pretty?" Brenda stared dead into my eyes and said, "Mom, you're not pretty at all. You are the ugliest mom at the whole preschool." I was stunned. Seeing her eyes curved into happy little slits, clearly enjoying the moment, I couldn't help but speak up. When you say things like that, it really hurts Mom's feelings. To my surprise, she crossed her arms and put on a self-righteous face. But my teacher said good kids always tell the truth. I was left completely speechless. A strange, uneasy feeling took root in my chest. Logically speaking, young children usually have a natural, loving bias toward the people who raise them, especially regarding their looks. But Brenda was different. Later, when she started elementary school, I spent $100 buying her a shiny, branded Frozen backpack she had been begging for. When my mother-in-law found out how much it cost, she marched over, pointed her finger right at my nose, and screamed at me for wasting Chris's hard-earned money. Brenda completely ignored the vicious scolding I was receiving. She treated the yelling as background music while she spun around the living room, dancing with her new bag. Later, I couldn't help but ask her, "When you heard Grandma yelling at me, did you have any thoughts about it?" Brenda rolled her eyes around for a second before locking them tightly onto mine. "Yeah, I thought it was super fun." Seeing the genuine, radiant smile on her face, my expression completely froze. She stared at me for a long time, drinking in my reaction, before adding her favorite line. "Don't be mad, Mom. I am just telling the truth. Just last month, Brenda caught a terrible flu. I didn't sleep for weeks, staying by her bedside day and night to nurse her back to health. When my husband, Chris, saw that I had lost 10 pounds from the stress, his heart broke. He asked Brenda, "Mom is working so hard to raise you. Are you going to take care of her when she gets old?" Brenda glanced at me, pouted her lips, and said, "No way. When Mom gets old, she needs to hurry up and go into the ground." Chris stiffened in shock. Every ounce of color drained from my face. Yet, seeing our devastated reactions, Brenda actually started clapping and cheering, thrilled by the misery she had caused. I remained completely silent for the rest of the day. Brenda even had the nerve to ask me, "Mom, are you upset again just because I told the truth?" That night, I didn't close my eyes for a single second. Chris tossed and turned beside me. Breaking the heavy silence, he suddenly whispered, "Whenever she says those things, she has to just be joking, right?" Even his voice trembled with uncertainty. Every single time her words tore me to pieces, a brief flash of malicious joy would appear in her eyes. Then she would deploy her favorite excuse, using telling the truth, to silence any complaints I had. Remembering all of this, my emotions were reaching a boiling point. I rushed to the door, eager to see the detective out and be done with this nightmare. "Mr. Detective," Brenda yelled out just as he stepped over the threshold. "If I find out my mom really is a kidnapper, can I call you to arrest her?" The detective gave Brenda a highly complicated look, then glanced back at me. Ultimately, he slipped a business card into Brenda's hand before walking away. After the detective left, Brenda tilted her head and studied my face. Seeing that I wasn't breaking down or yelling, a flash of deep disappointment crossed her eyes. I couldn't hold it back anymore. "Why did you say those things to the officer?" Brenda put her hands on her hips, lifting her chin with total arrogance. "Because I am a good kid who tells the truth. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself. You are the one who got mad and said I was kidnapped." That confirmed it. She purposely fed that story to the police just to punish me for the angry comment I made yesterday. I tightened my fists and asked her one more question. "If Mom really did steal you from human traffickers, but your real parents were terrible people and I kept you to protect you, would you still call the police and send me to prison?" Brenda nodded without a single second of hesitation. "Of course I would. Mom, I told you, I am a good kid who tells the truth." My heart plunged straight into an icy abyss. Chris had come home from work quietly and had been standing in the hallway for a while. His face was terrifyingly dark. Still, he suppressed his anger, walked over, and patted my shoulder to comfort me. Maybe she will grow out of it when she gets older. Seeing Chris upset made Brenda happy again. She completely ignored our pain. I couldn't stop the thought from echoing in my head. If Chris and I spent half our lives pouring our blood, sweat, and tears into raising a vicious, ungrateful parasite, why shouldn't we cut our losses right now? But we had raised her for so many years. I wanted to give her one absolute final chance. I looked at the detective's business card sitting on the table and spoke deliberately. Brenda, you really were kidnapped. Inside the safe in our bedroom, there is a file containing all your original records. It has the names of your biological parents on it. If you keep using your truths to intentionally break our hearts, your dad and I are going to pack your bags and send you back to your real family. Hearing my tone, the smugness vanished from her young face, replaced by a genuine, age-appropriate fear. She turned to Chris in a panic. Dad, is she telling the truth? Chris swallowed his disgust and sighed. Your mom is just messing with you. The panic slowly faded from Brenda's face. She puffed out her cheeks and glared at me. So it was a lie. I wish I actually had different parents. I hate you, Mom. Chris's expression darkened even further, but her entire focus was locked onto me. I played along, forcing a deeply wounded, heartbroken expression onto my face. Only then did her lips part into a satisfied, cruel smile. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Brenda truly believed she was our biological flesh and blood. Because she thought that bond was indissoluble, she felt completely emboldened to hurt me without any fear of consequences. Any remaining warmth in my heart completely froze over. Late that night, as I hovered on the edge of sleep, I heard the subtle click of the bedroom door handle turning. A tiny shadow slipped into the room. A minute later, the shadow sneaked back out. From the hallway outside, a deliberately hushed, childlike voice whispered into a phone. Hello, is this the police? Honestly, my mom really is a kidnapper. All the proof is hiding inside her safe. You need to come arrest her right now. The police response was incredibly fast. I barely had time to throw a cardigan over my shoulders before the front door was aggressively pushed open. Brenda ran crying into the arms of a uniformed officer, pointing a trembling finger at me while wearing a mask of absolute terror. My mom is a human trafficker. She told me she kidnapped me. The officer didn't notice, but from my angle, I clearly saw the wicked, triumphant glint in Brenda's eyes. It was that exact same thrill of successfully torturing me with her honesty. The lead officer stepped forward, his hand resting intimidatingly on his utility belt. His voice commanded authority. Ma'am, we need you to open the safe in your bedroom immediately so we can inspect the contents. Chris had been woken by the commotion. He rushed into the living room, panic flashing across his face when he heard the word safe. You can't open that. Taking Chris's panic as a sign of guilt, the officer signaled to a colleague carrying a heavy breaching kit to step forward. Looking at the heavy metal pry bars hitting the floor, I turned my gaze slowly to Brenda. Brenda, your dad told you during the day that it was just a joke. Why did you still call the police? Is this what you call telling the truth? Brenda clamped her mouth shut, conveniently ignoring what Chris had told her earlier. I looked at her with a heavy, loaded stare. If that safe opens, you are going to regret it for the rest of your life. Brenda snorted loudly and crossed her arms. Mom never knows the difference between a joke and the truth. I have to punish Mom. This way, Mom will learn to only tell the truth, just like me. The first lock on the safe popped open with a loud crack under the officer's pry bar. The heavy steel door swung wide. Inside rested a single, tightly sealed metal lockbox. I looked at Brenda one last time. If we prove right here, and now that you are not my daughter, will you pack your bags and go back to your biological parents? Brenda answered without missing a beat. Yes. Every time I tell the truth, Mom gets mad. I hate Mom. The very last microscopic shred of pity I held for this girl evaporated into thin air. The sealed lockbox was a high-density, tamper-proof container I had bought specifically for this. It was incredibly difficult to pry open by force. Watching the officer sweat as he struggled with his tools, I finally spoke up. I can open it with my passcode, but only if Brenda signs a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights form with me. Brenda didn't understand the legal terminology of what a relinquishment form was, but she recognized that I desperately did not want that box opened. Because of that, she nodded eagerly. She pressed her thumb into an ink pad and stamped her print onto the document I printed out. I punched in Brenda's birthday on the keypad. The box clicked open. Inside lay 3 neatly stacked files. The first was a legal adoption certificate. The second was a stack of official police reports and news clippings from the day she was rescued from the trafficking ring. The third was a detailed background file on her biological parents. The lead officer read the adoption papers and remained silent. He moved to the second file. His eyes widened in shock. He read the police reports over and over again. When he finally looked back up at me, the suspicion was gone, replaced by profound respect. You fought off a gang of traffickers to get her back. Lady, you have some serious guts. Brenda, expecting to see me handcuffed and dragged away, stood completely paralyzed when she heard the officer praising me instead of arresting me. The officer didn't dwell on his amazement for long. Driven by professional duty, he opened the third file. With just one glance, he froze. He looked up at me in absolute disbelief. Are you sure about this? These are the kids' real parents. You actually want to send her back to them? The other officers, confused by their sergeant's reaction, crowded around to read the file. A moment later, every single one of them turned to look at Brenda, with eyes full of deep, uncomfortable pity. Everyone was waiting for my answer. I simply closed my eyes and nodded. The relinquishment agreement is signed. There is no going back now. Looking at the strange reactions of the adults around her, the reality of the situation finally seemed to pierce through Brenda's arrogance. Pure terror washed over her face. Brenda's lower lip began to tremble as she looked around the room. The triumphant, malicious smirk that had defined her face for years was completely gone, replaced by the raw panic of a 7-year-old who had finally realized she had walked herself into a trap. "What's in there?" she demanded, her voice cracking as she tried to maintain her usual demands for the truth. "Mom, tell them to stop looking at me like that. What does the file say?" The sergeant looked down at her, the pity in his eyes hardening into a cold, professional detachment. "Little girl, you wanted the absolute truth. Well, here it is. Your mother didn't kidnap you. She saved you from a nightmare. And you just legally signed away your right to stay here."
No.
"She's lying," Brenda shrieked, turning to Chris.
Dad.
"Tell them. You said it was a joke." Chris couldn't even look her in the eyes. He turned his back, his shoulders shaking as he stared out the window into the dark night. The silence from the man who had spent 7 years coddling her, hoping she would grow out of it, was the loudest rejection Brenda had ever faced. I stepped forward and took the third file from the sergeant's hand. I opened it and turned the pages toward Brenda, letting her see the mugshots of the biological parents she had so desperately wished for. The man in the photo had hollow eyes, a scarred face, and a rap sheet that stretched for miles, including multiple convictions for child abuse and human trafficking. The woman beside him looked severely emaciated, arrested dozens of times for severe narcotics distribution and negligence. "These are your biological parents, Brenda," I said, my voice entirely devoid of anger, which made it terrifyingly cold. 7 years ago, they sold you to a trafficking ring for a few $100s to fund their habits. I took a bullet to the shoulder, pulling you out of that basement before the police even arrived. We adopted you legally, so you would never have to know the horror of where you came from. Brenda stared at the photos, her face turning as white as a sheet. No, they must be rich. They must be nice. I want a different mom." "Be careful what you wish for," the sergeant interrupted grimly. "According to our latest database update from just last month, these two were released from federal prison on parole. They currently reside in a state-monitored trailer park on the edge of the county line. Because you signed this relinquishment and called us here alleging a crime, we are legally required to process this termination of custody and notify Child Protective Services immediately."
Wait. No.
"I was just telling the truth," Brenda sobbed, the tears finally bursting forth. She lunged forward to grab my cardigan, but I stepped back, letting her hands grasp empty air. "You weren't telling the truth, Brenda," I whispered. "You were weaponizing words to hurt the only people who ever loved you." And today, the truth finally ran out. By 4 a.m., a social worker named Sarah had arrived at our house. The atmosphere was thick and suffocating. Brenda sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching her precious $100 frozen backpack, the very one she had danced with while watching my mother-in-law humiliate me. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Vance," Sarah said, looking over the signed relinquishment forms and the adoption files. "Are you absolutely certain about this? The state can provide family counseling, behavioral therapy." "No," I cut her off firmly. "We have spent years absorbing her malice. Every time she tore my heart out, she rejoiced. She ruined my reputation, cheered when I was berated, and prayed for my death. She did all of this because she believed our love was a cage she could rattle without consequences. We are done. Chris finally spoke up, his voice raspy. We gave her a final warning yesterday afternoon. We told her exactly what would happen. Her response was to call the police in the middle of the night to try and put her own mother in prison. There is nothing left to save. Hearing Chris give up on her completely shattered Brenda's remaining defenses, she threw herself onto the floor, pulling at Chris's pant leg.
Dad, please.
I promise I won't say it anymore. I'll say Mom is pretty. I'll say she's the prettiest mom in the world. But that wouldn't be the truth, would it, Brenda? I asked, looking down at her. You told me I was the ugliest mom at the preschool. You told me you wanted me 6 feet under. Go find your real parents. Let's see how much they appreciate your honesty. Sarah sighed, heavily burdened by the grim reality of the